You talked a lot about Milton Friedman, and actually, I was just listening on a book on the way here, a Simon Sinek book, and he's talking about Milton Friedman. I'm like, wow, how serendipitous that on the way there. So I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't talk about that a little bit. And you mentioned it even with Enron, like what are the incentives? And Milton Friedman, business economist, said that the purpose of business is to generate a profit and that you're
to maximize.
Maximize. Okay, yeah.
Maximize legal profits.
Okay. Yeah, so go ahead. Say a little bit more about that and his place on it. And this is from like 70s-ish,
Yeah, right.
Is
So Milton Friedman wrote a famous article for the New York Times. I think it was in 1973 or 1977. I'm not remembering the exact date. But he was basically a libertarian economist and argued that the only social responsibility of business was to maximize legal profits.
Yeah.
So he was basically responding to people who were advocating for what we now would call stakeholder capitalism, or the idea that you have a variety of responsibilities. And he was claiming that the only responsibility was to maximize profits. And he gives a variety of arguments for that. But you could hypothesize that there could be dangers, ethical dangers in that position.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think Enron, keep going back to that, is a good example because they felt they were delivering to their shareholders.
Right.
Yeah. And then their actions, obviously, they're not doing the right thing. So decades now later, that thinking has evolved, obviously, to some degree. But I think there's still businesses that hold that belief that the bottom line is the most important. But that's when they run into danger.
Right. I think you could run into danger on the stakeholder side too. I mean, I don't think there's a completely safe stance.
No, right.
But there has been some interesting research done by business ethicists who've looked at mission statements, and they've tried to compare stakeholder versus stockholder focused firms.
Oh, interesting.
And there's some evidence that stockholder focused firms may be more likely to get into ethical difficulty. Although again, you have to be careful how you measure that. I tend to be in favor of really concrete measured events that you can associate with deviance. So, for example, restating your earnings due to fraud.
Sure.
That's a pretty clear case of wrongdoing.
Yeah.
If the researcher is just sort of saying, well, I think the company did something wrong in developing this product, one person's hideous product is another person's salvation.
Right.
Those cases can be kind of trickier. But you can hypothesize that companies that are only wanting to maximize shareholder value might get into trouble because they just behave in a mechanical way. They sort of say, oh, we don't have to think about this. It's going to make a lot of money. Ergo, we can do it, and we know we'll be on the right side of things.
Right.
Also, sometimes shareholders want companies to do things in the short run that will generate short-run profits, but may not be good for the long-run health of the company.
Yeah.
So even then, you'd have to ask Milton Friedman, well, what revenues or profits are we talking about, short-term or long-term? And he's noticeably silent on that topic. So what I'm saying is, even from the stockholder perspective, you could still have problems if you're too narrowly focused on this quarter's earnings. And if they're all that pressure, then you get people playing a lot of games, where they're moving revenue recognition around just to look like they've maximized revenue for that quarter.
So what would you say to an entrepreneur starting out? I mean, what's the right approach to take to that? And obviously you have to generate revenue to keep the company afloat, but do you have any advice for entrepreneurs that are thinking about starting a company and like what the ethos of the company should be, centered around ethics or purpose or?
Yeah, that's a great question, Karen. I think one, the company should, if it hasn't incorporated yet, it really needs to think about its incorporation. Does it want to incorporate as an S Corp or one of the new benefit corporations?
The B Corp, yeah.
So there's something to think about there. I don't give any advice. I think that any kind of corporate form could work, but there are different pressures depending upon how you incorporate. Because if you're a benefit corporation, what you need to produce is the benefit report every year, or biannually. It varies from state to state what the law requirement is. But then you're on the hook for showing that you have provided the benefit that you've committed to providing. I guess what I would say to an entrepreneur is your focus shouldn't be on how are we going to build the company and get out of here, in 5 years. Yeah. I think entrepreneurs who are thinking a lot about their exit plan are not thinking enough about what's going on in the here and now, and that's the danger. I think also they should think about what product or service are they developing where they have a good that's really good and a service that really serves. And if they are providing good goods and really beneficial
solving a problem, making society better, hopefully.
Yeah. I think they're less likely to go astray, and frankly, they're more likely to inspire Gen X and millennial workers. We have a lot of
Absolutely,
data
yeah.
on that. I'm sure you've probably spoken with people in the past who are much more knowledgeable about that than I am. But a lot of the data suggests that people, younger employees, are more interested in working for a company where they can see a tangible benefit back to a very specific community.
Yeah, absolutely. They're definitely looking for purpose, and even when it comes to like clothing, sustainability.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, and B Corps. They'll
Right.
seek out a B Corp and even pay more for the goods
Right.
if they have that other higher purpose.
Well, I don't know if you saw that Eileen Fisher and Nordstrom now are both going to start selling used clothing. Eileen Fisher will take back in used clothing and resell it.
I
And
did
even
not
if
see that.
Even if it's damaged, they now will repurpose.
Yeah.
Upcycle some of it. Yeah, repurpose some of it. So that's interesting. And I haven't verified the claim about Nordstrom's, but a colleague just told me
Yeah.
that she had read that Nordstrom's is going to start selling used clothing. And so,
Well, that's interesting. There's a professor at DePaul that came and talked to our DBA cohort, and he talked about the donation pollution, and that clothing is one of the biggest sources of that, which you don't think about. You're donating your clothes and then it becomes in a landfill somewhere. So that's fascinating that they're taking that approach. I think there is a big opportunity for that for sure.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to really think the whole stream because actually my husband and I were just talking today about rags.
Yeah.
And, the rag industry is a really important way that cotton gets recycled. But the more clothing has synthetic materials, the less it can go into the rag stream.
Okay.
So then you have a problem about landfill, or you have a problem where churches and other groups send a lot of clothing over, let's say to Africa, and then basically you displace the local entrepreneurs in those
Yeah.
countries. So there's been some studies done on kente cloth manufacturing in Kenya, where the local beautiful cloth has now been largely displaced because the market has just been flooded with Western cast-offs.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's not exactly pollution. It's more like, I don't know, colonization or
Yeah,
clothing
yeah.
colonization or something.
Yeah, I also have to think about the ripple effect. You think you're doing
Yeah.
good, but what's the
Right.
long-term effect?